Awesome. So I'm Lauren Turner with 1851franchise.com, and I'm here today with Robert Needham with Dr. Needham's Franchise Teachings. And we're going to talk a little bit about how franchise businesses can start to plan their post-COVID recovery now. So thank you for joining me, Robert.
Oh, I'm glad to be with you, Lauren. Thank you so much.
So if you don't mind, can we first start off with you telling us just a little bit more about you and your background in franchising?
Well, I started in franchising about 20 years ago, and I began first looking to buy a franchise. But before I purchased a franchise, I actually met up with some attorneys, needless to say, who were in the business, and I began to talk to them. And I realized that my practice as a business advisor really could serve the community well. So I began to study the industry. And then, like I said, about 20 years ago, we formed a company called Franchisee as a subsidiary of Spectrum Advanced Markets, which is my business consulting firm. And as a result, we helped about 300 franchisors develop their concepts. We've helped numerous franchises, of course. Some of them go all the way into the top, 50 in the franchise 500, as well as others who've just been small regional franchisors.
So, can you tell me a little bit about who you work with or who would be a good fit to take your class?
Well, we decided to make a class. In 2007, I wrote a book called Solving the Puzzle of Owning a Franchise. It was a few years into the process, and I felt like the consumer needed an advocacy at that time to just help them understand the process of even buying a franchise. Because as you know, franchises are awarded more than they're sold. And so the idea was to help the franchisee, if you will, put the right ribbon on them so that when they present themselves to the franchisor, they would look and feel like the franchisor was looking for. And so in that book, I came up with 9 different puzzle pieces, that a person does. The first one is to assess themselves to find out where they are, for example, and then begin the journey all the way to maybe at the end. Puzzle piece 9 was, do I exit? Do I expand? And if I expand, do I stay with the same brand, or do I possibly go multi-brand? And so along the way, we've dealt with the franchisee mostly. We've helped them. Now, in those middle years, I helped through Franchise Inc. We actually were a franchise consulting firm, so we would help franchise buyers, find the appropriate franchisor and help them go through the process. Today, I work as a franchise advisor, so I don't actually sell franchise anymore. I committed myself to teaching the consumer more and more, because I think in today's environment, I think you'd agree that the franchisee needs to be more informed and is more informed than they have ever been before. And sometimes just knocking out some of the myths and understanding what to do is the best thing to do.
Absolutely. So, if we're talking about solving the puzzle of buying a franchise, and I just want your take, looking at everything that's happened with our economy and with COVID-19, a lot of uncertainties in the franchising world. What industries do you think, in your opinion, are going to be the strongest opportunities in franchising as we look toward the second half of this year?
Well, industry experts tell us that by 2020, which we're in 2020 now, that 50% of Americans would be freelancers. And of course, we went from a position where we were in the greatest state of employment in our country to now the greatest state of unemployment. And so I think a lot of people are considering, do I go back to my job, or does my job even exist to go back to? And so those who, and I think of people who buy a franchise as kind of on a continuum. On one end is employee, and on the other end is entrepreneur. And the franchisee is kind of like that person right in the middle. They're not quite an employee, but they're not an entrepreneur either, because entrepreneurs, well, they don't take directions so well. They like to do it their own, if you will. So I call them a little bit of country, a little bit of rock and roll, if you will. You got to be a little both. And so as we look at the COVID problem, I think brick and mortar franchising has its challenges, in the sense that you have this cost of rent. What happens if they shut the economy down again? So I think that the franchisee who wants to own a brick and mortar franchise, and typically when we think of brick and mortar, we think of food. You know, food franchises are going to come back and come back strong. Now they may have to evolve, but I think a lot of the new franchisees are saying, I don't have as much money, or I don't want to take the risk that I might have been willing to take before. So let me get my feet started, maybe with something a little more agile and a little less fragile, if you will. And for that reason, I think they may be a surge in mobile franchising or even work from home franchising of some sort.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. So, as we're starting to get into this post-COVID recovery, businesses are starting to open up. I wanted to get your opinion and talk through what the remainder of the year might look like. So, if I'm a franchise owner now, what would your advice be that I should be the most focused on, and what should my expectations be for the remainder of the year?
So we're talking about existing franchise owners right
Right.
now. Well, I think first of all, getting back open is probably their greatest concern. If during this time they were deemed, there's these new words, essential and non-essential, right? So if they were deemed non-essential, and most businesses were, then they're having to deal with, how do I get my business back open? I think one of the biggest challenges that they're going to have is consumer confidence, not so much in their brand, but in just simply walking in a physical store. Today in most states, you still have to wear a mask when you go out. And so people are a little apprehensive. Fear is sort of the day of the word, in the word of the day, excuse me. And so question is, how do we overcome fear? And so I think you're going to have to find some creativity in the way they market to get people to be willing to step across the threshold. Especially in the food franchise business where they're used to deliveries now, people have gotten comfortable with having their food delivered. Will they go back and actually want to sit in a restaurant? I can't wait till I can sit in a restaurant, because eating on my lap or eating at home is, well, that's just not entertainment. So I think that's true. People say even the travel industry is going to suffer greatly. I don't think so. I think by late summer, people are going to be scrambling to get back on cruise boats and to go to vacation places because they're sick and tired of being in their house. So I don't think things are as bad as people want to paint them out to be. In fact, there's an old hot dog store where the guy sold hot dogs, and he didn't know it was the middle of the Depression, so he sold hot dogs and his business thrived until his son come home and told him, said, "Dad, why are you selling hot dogs? We're in the middle of a depression. Take that sign off the road out there and start cutting back on your costs." And he followed what his son did. Eventually, he went out of business. See, things are as good or as bad as you think they are. And I think we're actually about to come into the greatest time of opportunity that our country has seen in many years. I'm greatly encouraged that now is the time to own a business. It's not necessarily time to rent your life to an employer, but it's time to own your life and take charge of it and control your destiny.
So, can you tell me a little bit more about why you think now is a good time?
Well, the old concept of the law of supply and demand is you buy low and sell high. Well, we're at the low. So in reality, now is the perfect time to buy. And I realize that's normally when we talk about investments, but I really think they should look at their franchise as an investment. Anytime you own a business, I mean, it's not just a place to work, it's actually a place for you to earn a living, of course, but we want to get beyond a living to get to the point of wealth accumulation so that you can leverage yourself in the future. I mean, the ideal place is to get to the place where you work less and earn more, not work more and earn less. And so the idea of owning a business, now is the best time to get in. I think franchisors are probably going to be a little more flexible now than maybe they have been in the past, if that was necessary. And at least there's going to be adjustments made. And now is the great time to get in there when that negotiation is taking place.
Great. So I want to ask you a little bit about adjustments in general. Obviously, we're talking about delivery and pickup, and that's obviously here to stay in addition to dining rooms reopening. Looking at some other businesses, though, they've adjusted to be more virtual. And I'd like your feedback and opinion if you think what's going to happen as we start to reopen. Are businesses going to keep their virtual elements? What makes that COVID adjustment sustainable for the long haul that would kind of adjust the business model in general?
Well, I think that's a great question. One of the things I think we see is that businesses are a little afraid and consumers are a little afraid. So both of them are going to want to keep this virtual aspect as a portion of their business model. I think while internet sales and online selling has been growing over these years anyway, I think it's going to continue. So that's not going to change. I think that people are going to still want to go to their local store though. It's still hard to buy clothes with certainty online. Now I know people do that, but they still like to try them on. So that means stuff has to get sent back and forth a lot. And if you need, a new dress for dinner tonight or 2 days from now, you really can't do that online. So the need for the local store will always be there. The question is what will the local store have to evolve to in order to survive? And I think what we're going to see is a great drawdown in the cost of rents and how retail leases are created for franchisees going forward in the future. They're not going to be as one-sided toward the lessor as they maybe have been in the past, because if they do, chances are people just won't take out the leases.
Yeah, that's interesting. I know some people are really into going in stores, and some people have been online, and so people have been affected in different ways. Operationally, let's say though, as we're looking at stores reopening, if I'm a franchise owner, I guess the number one thing we're probably going to be concerned about with making sure we're following like the sanitation guidelines and where we have Purell out and all those types of things. People are wearing masks if they're supposed to be wearing masks.
6 feet
Yeah,
distancing.
6 feet, we're distanced, all that good
Right.
stuff. There's capacity numbers. What, I guess, challenges do you see out of that, and what opportunities do you see out of that for existing folks? And I guess when do you know it's time to reopen?
Well, one of the challenges at retail is going to be how do I structure my store so that I can get the right velocity? In sales and marketing, the secret is that you've not only got to be able to buy and sell, but you need certain velocities where product has to turn off that shelf. And so high turn items are usually clustered together, and so if you can't cluster the people together, then the configuration of the store is going to have to change slightly. They're going to have to decentralize that clustering, if you will, and put it around the store, almost like create stations. In fact, there may even be multiples of the same product in different locations within the store in order to get this proper distancing if this continues. Now, I do think it's going to go away to a certain extent. We already see that when you go to the grocery store, people aren't social distancing everybody exactly at 6 feet now. And so you're going to see some of that change, but there will always still be that, does that person look sick feeling, and should I stay back a little bit? And in that case, I think stores are going to have to figure out. So merchandising of goods is going to be one of the areas where there's going to be an interesting challenge for businesses. The second would be is supply chain issues. I mean, you're going to need more than one supplier nowadays because depending upon what type of business you're in, I mean, certain fast food restaurants today, I mean, even the largest chains, I mean, I go to McDonald's occasionally, and today even McDonald's, as big as they are as a franchisor, they have limited menus right now because certain products are just not available. It's no fault of McDonald's, it's a supply chain issue, and they're going to have to address. So we're all going to have to address that. Well, you can imagine if a behemoth the size of McDonald's has some challenges, small franchisors will too. And so having multiple channels of the same product is going to be important too. And then lastly, I think once again, you're going to have some incentive. This thing about online shopping that you mentioned earlier, the Amazon's got a stall believe that shipping is free anymore. So in order to be competitive in that market, you're going to have margins on your product. So margin's going to become an issue. You're going to have margins enough on your product so that you can afford to ship it, which means you're going to have to learn how to be in the shipping business, which most retailers have never done that really. They know how to put it in a sack, but they don't know how to put it in a box and ship it across the country in an affordable way. So there will be opportunities for all new kinds of consultants and people that can help explain all that as we move through this new market.
I think you mentioned something interesting about how McDonald's is even struggling to get certain product. Large franchisor to small franchisor to independent shop owner. How much more of an advantage do you think that your size right now is going to help you get what you need over the small guys?
Well, actually, I think it's the opposite because there's two aspects to consider. By the way, I wrote a book called Escaping Economic Slavery. Pitch that book for a second. And in that book, I deal with these issues quite a bit. Actually, before it was written pre-COVID, but I dealt with some of these supply chain issues and how the large big business or big box supplier unfairly competes with the small supplier, you know. And one of the strategies for getting around that is the fact that if you become a niche seller, you can actually go in and buy those very select products where the big box buyer is buying in bulk. That's how they're getting their discount. And so if you can focus on and become a big seller of a small thing, if you will, then you can compete very fairly with the big buyer. But if you try to be a generalist, it's going to be tough to compete with the big box buyers because with limited supply chain, they buy it out. We see this with toilet paper, right? I mean, this was the great joke, you know, in America that the new currency, if you're a toilet paper manufacturer, you had the new currency in America because people would trade you anything for a roll of toilet paper a few days ago. But now it's getting a little bit better because supply chain is caught up.
So I guess I have another question for you, going back to franchising. And obviously, the whole process of looking into a franchise and the discovery is not a short process. It can take months. So when do you think we're going to see a bump in franchising? When do you think that folks that might have been laid off or who might just be frustrated in the corporate world might turn to franchising? What timelines do you think?
Well, right now, many of the franchisors, like everyone else, are working from home. So communications are a bit frazzled. You know, they could be better just because the complexity of trying to, you know, have a call come into one place and send it to someone else who's not physically even in the office, you know. When that improves, which I suspect will be late summer, mid to late summer, then I think the franchise season is usually pretty flat anyway in June and July because most of the people buying franchises are also trying to go on vacation. So the franchise can actually use this as an advantage. They can redevelop their strategy in June and July and be postured for August and fourth quarter to be able to then deal with the new franchisee's concerns. And so I think that I think there's new communications. The franchisee is going to have to hear answers in the questions. You know, right now we're in the season that most franchisors are also redoing their FDDs, the franchise disclosure documents. So they're going to have to start answering questions in there like, how do you make your business essential versus non-essential? And if it's non-essential, how does that impact you? That's kind of an item one discussion, if you will, you know, in the 23 items that are in a franchise. And then they're going to have to talk about supply chain issues, you know, and that's typically an item 9 issue. So they're going to have to deal with that. And item 7, they're going to have to adjust, which is the min-max purchase of the franchise. They're going to have to figure out how to adjust that for seasons where maybe the government may require us to shut down again. That's going to require new contract language. So now it's perfect timing because we're in the retooling, if you will, for the new normal. So I think this is a great opportunity for franchisors to get some good advice from some good franchise attorneys and consultants who understand the industry and to make these mental adjustments, make their FDDs more friendly. Then they also need to build good customer relations back with the franchisees. I'm sure some of the franchisees have suffered through this period. There's no question about that. And so they need to show them a sense of humanity, you know, so that they can see that they're in it together because they're going to need those franchisees when it comes time for validation. You know,
Yeah.
that's going to be a tough thing. You know, if you call and say, well, my franchisor didn't call me for 3 months during the virus, so I don't know if you should buy this thing or not. Or I stayed in touch with my franchisor along the way. They did some workouts with me. We helped me survive my business, and now we're moving forward. Whoa, that's great validation. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, that's really fair. I guess question for you on the franchisor side. If we're looking at the future, we're looking at getting out of this, restructuring, adjusting, changing our FDD. Um, from the franchisor side, do you envision more getting automated, digital, virtual? Is that a good thing? What do you think?
Well, I think
Your
once the system,
process.
well, I think it's positive. I think first of all, I think businesses in general, you know, I participate in a lot of studies, and one of the most recent studies was what does it cost to put a person in a cubicle nowadays? And for the average business out there, it's about $6,800 a year just to physically rent the space, air condition, heat it, put them in it, buy the furniture that they sit in. All it's about $6,800 a year. So, needless to say, when budgets are going up and down, you want to try to find a normaling through that. So, reducing the cost of overhead is something every business is going to have to look at, and franchisors are not exempt. So I would think franchisors would go to a more diversified, more agile structure, which will require some adjustments in communications, like I said, so they can switch the phone call properly. And then it'll require, you know, interviews are pretty much gone to these Zoom type calls anyway. And there's probably now a dozen different video conferencing softwares out there. So there's going to be plenty of access. So I do think that this is the way it's going to be. And I do think that franchisors will need to make some adjustments, and that'll help lower their overhead in the home office. Because I think that franchisors that don't have a financial plan that that allows them to survive 3, 4, 6 months of lost revenue from royalties are at risk. And so, you know, strategic planning in the area of finance, and, you know, just like weight loss, you know, the secret to weight loss is you eat less and move more. All diets are based on that same principle. Well, in finance, it's spend less and earn more. And so in business, that's the way it's got to be. They got to find a way to cut those overhead costs without losing customer assurance, and then increase revenue, which may mean that franchisors may have to look at some diversification, new products or services that they can offer the franchisee that maybe they weren't in before, that become profit centers.
Do you have an example of what that would look like, maybe?
Well, probably more natural one would be, how do I help my franchisees really drive traffic into their stores? And if they're non-store based, how do I get them leads? So, you know, being sincerely interested in how to drive that traffic. And that's a profit center for them if they get good at it. And it's a reasonable profit center. I'm not saying that franchisors aren't interested in franchisees having traffic. I'm saying it hasn't had to be their business in the past, really. Now it might be, because as much as selling their product is important, getting someone to sell it to is just as important.
So if I'm a franchisee, besides leaning on my franchisor, what else should I be doing right now to start building my business back and getting back on that road to recovery?
Well, again, that's a great question, because, you know, as you know, franchisors don't really like entrepreneurial spirits. You know, they like you to be, and rightly so. And the concept of business format franchising is, we have a proven plan, we have a proven brand, and we have good training. Just follow that. But I think there has to be some time for innovation now. I think it's time for franchisors to let it move a little to the right, and let the franchisees give them some suggestions. You know, especially, look, I'm a little bit older than you are for sure, and I'm a little bit older than a lot of the new franchisees that are coming into the marketplace, and they have new ideas based in technology and those type of things. A lot of people that run franchises today at the franchisor level, well, they're a little bit older. So I think some meeting of the minds there might be a positive thing. I think it's time for the franchisors to start having focus groups, conversations with their franchisees more, letting them have mastermind sessions, maybe once a quarter, once a month would be great, but once a quarter for sure, just so they can find the trends, hear the problems, and make the adjustments that are necessary. Like I said, I hate this word new normal, but I guess it is a new normal. It's the new way anyway.
Totally. No, I think that makes sense. And it's always good to have a pulse what the franchisees are thinking and what the franchisor. But people have mentioned communication has increased during this time. And I guess when things were good, maybe franchisees didn't feel like they needed the franchisor as much. But I think that's positive that there is so much communication, and hopefully that'll stay.
Well, I
Um,
hope so too.
do you have anything else that we didn't talk about that you'd like to add?
Well, no, I think we've covered most of the things for today. One of the reasons we created the course for franchisees was so that they could be an informed consumer. And we needed to do that in an environment where they didn't have to worry about if I was trying to sell them something. Now, that's an interesting paradigm because most of the time they're used to getting help from the franchise consultants for free. So we've made the course inexpensive, under $400 to get really thousands of dollars worth of advice. But our job is not to replace the broker or the consultant or even the franchisor's developer. Our job is to give them a better consumer. And so I think the obligation sits on both sides. The franchisor needs to find new ways of reaching toward the consumer that's looking to buy a franchise by helping them make more money. And that, of course, helps them make more royalty. But I think the prospective franchisees, there's a problem in our industry that has not really changed that much. The story is that there's about, 3,500 to 4,000 franchisors. That number hasn't really changed much over the last say at least the last 20 years. So that means some come and some go, right? That's what that means. The other thing is that the statistics say that we sell about 15,000 franchises generally per year. That hasn't changed much either. So that means that the consumer is missing something. Because with the opportunity to own your own business and control your own destiny versus working for someone else, that's one of the great American dreams. So I think the time for a course that teaches that is now. I think that's why we've chosen to become that advocacy. So I really appreciate you interviewing me, about what I do, and let me share some of my ideas with your listeners and your viewers, and hopefully together and with many others in our industry, we'll be able to get franchising really to a higher and new, better place than it has been.
Awesome. And remind everyone, what is your website? Where can people find you?
They can go to drneedham.com, DRNEEDHAM.com, and you'll find everything there that you need.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your insights. Much appreciated.
Thank you so much. Good to be with you.